All right, ready to dive into Jane Austen?
Always.
Today, it's Pride and Prejudice, and we're going to figure out why it's still so huge over 200 years later.
It's not just a love story, though, is it?
Nope, we're going beyond that, and we've got some great sources to help us excerpts from the book itself.
And a really smart podcast episode breaking it all down.
Exactly. So no need to have read the whole thing, but you might want to after this.
It's definitely one of those books that hooks you.
Okay, so that famous first line everyone quotes, right? It is a truth universally acknowledged.
That a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife.
Right. Sounds kind of funny on the surface, but
it tells us a lot about Austen's world.
Doesn't it? Like, what's the real message there?
For women back then, marriage wasn't just about romance.
Oh, not at all.
It was about economic survival, security. Your whole future depended on finding the right husband.
So it's not just about finding true love. It's about, like, actual survival, which makes everything the characters duo so much more intense.
Absolutely.
Okay, so speaking of characters, Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy. Their first meeting is...
Oh, a complete disaster.
It's almost painful to read. Darcy says that line about Elizabeth being tolerable.
But not handsome enough to tempt me.
Ouch. You can just feel the awkwardness, right?
And that one bad first impression shapes their whole relationship.
Like, it sets the tone for everything that comes after.
It makes you think about how much first impressions still matter, even today.
Totally. Job interviews, first dates. We're always judging people, right?
It's human nature. But Austen was so good at showing how those snap judgments can be totally wrong.
Okay, so along with first impressions, there's this big theme of love versus money. You've got Bingley and Jane. They're just head over heels.
Effortless romance.
But then there's Darcy. He's way more hesitant, especially about Elizabeth's family.
He thinks they're beneath him socially.
So is he just a snob? Or were his worries valid back then?
That's the tricky part. On one hand, he comes across as super arrogant.
Yeah, especially with Elizabeth's family.
But then, marrying someone from a lower class could ruin your reputation back then.
So maybe he was being cautious for a reason.
It's a good reminder that people's choices are shaped by the world they live in.
It's not all about individual personality, right?
Right. And speaking of societal expectations, we can't forget Mr. Collins.
Oh, Mr. Collins.
His proposal to Elizabeth shows how marriage wasn't always about love.
It was sometimes purely practical.
He's this pompous guy who just assumes Elizabeth will accept him.
Because he's, like, offering financial security.
Exactly. But Elizabeth wants a marriage based on respect and affection.
And she's not afraid to say no.
Which was a big deal for a woman back then.
It shows how strong she is, how she's willing to go against the norm.
Totally.
But while she's figuring out Darcy and dodging Mr. Collins, there's another guy who enters the picture.
Oh, Mr. Wickham. Now he's an interesting character.
To say the least. Charming, handsome.
Oh.
But is he really who he seems?
That's the question, isn't it?
We'll have to dive into that in part 2.
Wickham. He's like the master of deception. Seems so charming, so trustworthy.
Especially when he's telling that sob story about how Darcy wronged him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Elizabeth, she's already got this prejudice against Darcy.
So she totally falls for it.
Hook, line, and sinker. He plays on her biases, uses his charm like a weapon.
It's kind of scary, right? Even smart people can get manipulated.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially when someone's playing on your emotions.
Makes you wonder if we still fall for those types today, you know?
The too good to be true types.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see
It's
that.
like the timeless thing.
We're all drawn to charisma, right? Sometimes we ignore the warning signs.
Wickham's like a cautionary tale almost.
Yeah.
Don't just trust charm. Use your critical thinking.
Right. So we've got Wickham stirring up trouble, and then there's Darcy, who, bless his heart, decides to propose.
And it goes about as well as you'd expect.
Meaning?
It's a train wreck. Awkward, brings up her family's lower status. Basically insults everyone.
Like, how do you even do that? You'd think someone like Darcy would know how to, I don't know, be charming.
Maybe he was trying to be and just failed miserably.
Or maybe, was he being rude on purpose?
That's what Austen does so well. She doesn't give us easy answers.
So we're left wondering, was Darcy just clueless about expressing feelings?
Or was it pride? Social conditioning? Who knows?
But then we get the letter.
Ah, the letter.
After Elizabeth rejects him, Darcy writes this letter that changes everything.
Truth bomb time. Wickham's lies exposed, Darcy's real motivations explained.
It's like a total shift in perspective.
Elizabeth has to face her own prejudices, see Darcy in a new light.
And she realizes she was wrong.
It's a huge moment of growth for her. She starts to question her own judgments.
It's amazing how much happens in that one letter.
Pure Austen brilliance.
Okay, so then Elizabeth ends up visiting Pemberley, Darcy's estate. You'd think she'd be even more intimidated.
But it's the opposite.
Why? It's just a fancy house, right?
It's more than that.
Yeah.
Pemberley shows us Darcy's true character.
We see him away from all that London society pressure.
And it's his servants who praise him. They say he's a kind, generous master.
Not the arrogant guy Elizabeth met at the ball.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
like we get to peek behind the curtain and see the real Darcy.
Okay, but then disaster strikes.
Lydia,
Elizabeth's younger sister runs off with Wickham.
huge scandal. Could ruin the whole Bennet family.
And guess who saves the day?
Darcy
He secretly fixes everything, arranges for them to marry.
protects Elizabeth and her family from disgrace.
Swoon! Talk about a grand gesture.
Shows you how much he loves her.
He's not driven by pride anymore. It's pure love and compassion.
It's character development at its finest.
And it paves the way for a second chance. Wickham's gone, Lydia's married, Bingley comes back, proposes to Jane,
Finally,
and then Darcy proposes to Elizabeth again.
round 2.
But this time, it's different. Humble, sincere, no insults about her family.
It's a proposal that reflects how much they've both grown.
They've let go of their pride, their prejudices, and they finally appreciate each other.
It's a beautiful ending to their journey,
It really shows the power of second chances, doesn't it?
and how love can change people.
But that's just the romance part. Pride and Prejudice is about so much more than that.
It's about, figuring yourself out, challenging those old ideas about society.
And realizing that, hey, people can change, second chances exist.
Exactly. But the crazy thing is, even though it's from, forever ago.
It still feels so relevant, right?
Totally. Pride, prejudice, feeling pressured to fit in, messed up relationships.
Mhm.
It's all still happening today.
Austen just gets it, you know. Human nature hasn't changed that much.
And that's why people keep coming back to this book. We see ourselves in it.
It's like she's holding up a mirror, making us look at the good and de the bad.
Makes you think, though. What if Pride and Prejudice was set today?
Ooh, good question. Would Darcy and Elizabeth still fall in love?
With all our modern stuff.
Yeah.
Social media, dating apps.
Would their problems be totally different?
Maybe some things would change, but I think the big themes would stay the same.
Like judging people too quickly, miscommunication.
And being blinded by your own ego. That never goes out of style, unfortunately.
So maybe Darcy would be like a tech CEO or something.
And Elizabeth would be an influencer.
But they'd still have that spark, that tension.
And they'd still have to learn and grow to get their happy ending.
It's wild to think Austen can still make us think about these things centuries later.
She was a genius, that's for sure.
So if you haven't experienced Pride and Prejudice yet, what are you waiting for?
Read the book, watch a movie version. There's so many ways to enjoy it.
And even if you think you know it, there's always something new to see.
It's one of those stories that gets richer every time you revisit it.
And hey, next time you're about to judge someone too harshly,
Or let your ego mess things up.
think of Elizabeth and Darcy. Give people a chance.
Be open to different perspectives. Don't let those prejudices win.
Well said. So that wraps up our deep dive into Pride and Prejudice.
But the conversation doesn't have to end here.
What did you think about the story? Would Darcy and Elizabeth work as a modern couple?
Let us know.
Thanks for joining us on this literary adventure, and until next time.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.